Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. Emily Dickinson. I've always wanted to like that poem, and if I'm being honest, I never really understood it. Dickinson describes hope as something constant, always perched in the soul, always singing, but that has never been my experience. Hope has historically been something that largely eluded me. It always felt like a costly choice, one that required embracing uncertainty and vulnerability, two things I would prefer to avoid. I discovered early on that you don't actually need hope to get through life. You can even find happiness and love, however tenuous, without it. And to me, hope felt unnecessary because I had something that I believed was far more reliable: control. And as a good Enneagram 8, control made me feel purposeful, powerful, and like I was the one writing my own story. Hope felt uncertain and passive. Control felt productive. I didn't need to wait for things I hoped might happen because I could make plans instead. And oh, I love a good plan. I knew what I liked, who I liked, and what my life was going to look like. Whether those plans were ultimately what I truly wanted or even what was good for me felt almost beside the point. I was a planner, and there would always be a plan. And for decades, that way of living served me well. Maybe for other people, control was an illusion, but for me, it felt real. And it worked until it didn't. Until life introduced me to a circumstance that couldn't be managed, planned, or solved. I want to preface this story by saying that I have permission from everyone involved to share it. I also want to level set your expectations. I've never told this story publicly before, and the chances of me getting through it without crying are basically zero. And I believe that tears are holy, so I will not apologize for them, but you have been warned. It was late November of 2023. My then 13-year-old son, Lucian, was homesick and throwing up. I'd finally gotten him settled into bed when my phone rang from an unknown number. I answered because sometimes, when I'm in just the right mood, I like to mess with spam callers. Oh, my car warranty's expiring? Goodness, do tell me more. But this wasn't a spam call. It was the older sister of Lucian's best friend. She had told me that earlier that evening, Lucian had confided in her sibling that he had tried to end his life. The vomiting I had assumed was caused by a stomach flu was actually the result of an overdose of prescription medication. That phone call marked the beginning of one of the darkest and most frightening seasons of my life. Over the next 2 months, Lucian was hospitalized and eventually diagnosed with a depressive mood disorder and anxiety. 6 months prior, I had started an incredibly demanding new job. I was trying to work full-time while simultaneously managing Lucian's care full-time, and that was one full-time too many. I felt scared, depleted, profoundly sad, and desperately lonely. Every day became the same rhythm: wake up, go to work, then to the hospital, come home, sleep, wash, rinse, repeat. My entire world narrowed to one focus: helping Lucian get well. And the hardest part was not knowing if he would. His care team was extraordinary, but it took a long time to find the right combination of medication and therapy. And I spent countless nights wondering not when I would be bringing him home, but if I would be bringing him home. And for the first time in my life, I had no answers, no plan. Nothing was up to me. I had never felt so helpless because I had never been so helpless. Every way I had learned to solve problems, suddenly proved useless against something that had no clear shape, no roadmap, and no timeline. My goal each day became simple: survive until the next one, both for my son and for myself. As the weeks stretched on, it wasn't just my sense of control that was unraveling. I prayed for a miracle. I prayed for healing. I prayed for light. Instead, I got more darkness. If I lacked hope before, now I was not only hopeless, I was angry. This being church and all, well, fake church, I'd love to tell you that I became the picture of faithful perseverance, that I leaned into God and prayed harder, trusted more deeply, and confidently believed that He alone would heal Lucian, and in the process, heal me too. Spoiler alert, that isn't what happened. I prayed, and God didn't answer my prayers, at least in the way that I wanted Him to. What I received wasn't certainty or instant healing. What I received was my friends Jordan and Lou, who showed up at the hospital unasked on the night Lucian was admitted. They held me while I let out a scream so primal that nearly 3 years later, I can still feel it in my bones. What I received was Ian, who came to my house to pray for me and Lucian, because praying anymore felt like it was the very last thing I wanted or was even capable of doing. What I received was my siblings, Jimmy, Christine, and Gloria, who picked up the oars and rowed the boat when I no longer had the strength to. And what I received was friends who quietly kept our family fed with meals and sustained with texts. And I received a remarkable group of 6 people, family and friends alike, who all agreed to get a matching tattoo of a star for Lucian. While Lucian was in the hospital, he had drawn stars all over his hands and arms. He told me that the idea of a small light of a star in the darkness had brought him comfort. So these 6 people permanently marked themselves with that same image because they wanted Lucian to know that whenever he found himself in a dark place, he had only to find one of us to be a pinprick of light in that darkness. At the time, I couldn't see any of these things for what they were. I couldn't recognize them as the trail of breadcrumbs God was quietly leaving for me along a path I didn't know I was walking. Eventually, Lucian stabilized enough to come home, and I'd love to tell you that was the end of the story, that we closed that chapter, everyone healed, and life returned back to normal, but that isn't how mental health issues usually work. Over the past few years, both of us have had to learn what a new normal looks like. Along the way, we've also been navigating Lucian's diagnoses of ADHD and OCD, and he's carried the weight of everything he experienced while also doing the ordinary work of being a teenager, which, if you have teenagers, you know is very annoying. And he's been doing all of that while navigating life as a trans teen in this particular version of America. Lucian being trans is not something I share lightly, both for his safety and my anxiety about his safety, but it is a part of his story and therefore part of mine. I won't say much about it except this. When all of this happened, the name he was using wasn't Lucian, it was Kavi. He had come out as trans when he was 12 and was in the process of finding a name that felt more like himself. After he came home from the hospital, he decided on the name Lucian for himself, and it didn't escape my notice that the meaning of Lucian is light. At the time, I filed that away as one of those little coincidences, and looking back now, I don't think it was a coincidence at all. I think it was Lucian's way of reminding himself that he didn't have to wait for someone else to bring light to his darkness, that he could be the light that he needed. And for the next couple of years, our life consisted of doctor's appointments, therapy, medication adjustments, small victories that sometimes felt impossibly hard won, and setbacks that reminded us that healing is rarely linear. Then, without realizing, something inside me began to change. At the beginning of this year, I noticed that I had started feeling hopeful. Not because our circumstances had suddenly become easy, not because the world had somehow become less frightening, and certainly not because January of 2026 was overflowing with reasons to feel optimistic. There was no dramatic breakthrough, no lightning bolt, no moment when I woke up and thought, yes, today is the day I will become a hopeful person. It was quieter than that. Hope had simply arrived. Or maybe I had finally noticed it had been arriving all along. That realization sent me back to one of my favorite passages in Scripture, which was already read today, Isaiah 43:19. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. And I've always loved that verse. It's always felt like God's promise to me, the perpetuity of God making a way where there is no way. And when I look back now, actually, I can see that hope didn't simply just appear out of nowhere. God was doing the new thing all the while. I just hadn't perceived it yet. And while I was surrounded by darkness and repeatedly coming to the end of myself, God was quietly making a way through the wilderness, not by removing me from it as I had wanted, but by placing people beside me to walk through it. I know now that I never would have chosen that wilderness for myself. I never would have willingly stepped into the kind of darkness that was both tomb and womb, the place where something had to die before something new could be born. Had it been left to me, I would have stayed exactly where I was, comfortable, capable, and convinced that control was enough. But God was doing a new thing. He was patiently unraveling the life I had stitched together through certainty and self-reliance so that he could create something truer and more whole. The poet and Sufi mystic Rumi wrote, "Where there is ruin, there is hope for a treasure." And I've always read that line as beautiful poetry, and now I know it as lived experience. In my ruin, I found the treasure of hope, or perhaps more truthfully, hope found me. I didn't ask for it. I didn't go looking for it. I didn't even know I needed it, but God knew. And so now, when I think back to Emily Dickinson's poem, I finally understand it. The little feathered friend called hope does perch in my soul more often these days. Is it continual birdsong? No, not yet. There are still difficult days. There are still anxious days. There are days when darkness feels much louder than hope. But my heart's default posture has changed. Where I once instinctively reached for control, I now find myself looking for hope. And that is not something I accomplished. It is something God has grown and given with his grace. When I agreed to be part of this sermon series, I asked Lucian for his permission to share this story, and he said yes immediately. I asked if he wanted more time to think about it, and he looked at me with a certainty that I wish I'd had at 16. He told me it was a part of who he was, and that he wasn't ashamed of his past. And that answer stopped me in my tracks. Here's a young man who has lived through more in 16 years that many of us will experience in a lifetime. He has stared into profound darkness and carried pain that no child should have to carry. And yet he has refused to let shame become part of his story. And I cannot think of a more hopeful thing than that. Maybe that is what hope has always been, not pretending that darkness never existed, not denying suffering, not insisting that every story gets tied up neatly with a bow. Maybe hope is the quiet conviction that darkness is just never the whole story, that God is still making a way in the wilderness, and that rivers really can float through deserts, that light, even the tiny light of a single star, is enough to help us keep walking. For so many years, I thought hope was fragile because it depended on circumstance. And now I know hope is resilient because it depends on God. And that has made all the difference. Thank you.